All right, so end times prophecies, right? Everyone's got a theory.
It seems like it.
But today we're diving into some excerpts with timelines and actual astronomical events.
Right?
Apophis that ring a bell.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to unpack all that, plus that whole 2024 thing, why it wasn't a bullseye, at least according to this source.
Yes, like putting together a giant puzzle, you know? You've got these ancient texts, historical records, and even the stars.
And they all have to fit somehow.
Exactly. What I find so interesting about this source is how they blend all these elements to actually put dates on these major events. It's pretty ambitious.
No kidding. So how does someone even begin to put a date on something as massive as the Second Coming? Where do you even start?
Well, they start with Jesus, believe it or not.
Okay, going right to the source.
They really dig deep into historical records to try to pin down the exact timeline of his life, death, resurrection, the whole 9 yards.
I mean, it makes sense. You got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly. And they use some pretty interesting anchors. Like, they start with King Herod the Great.
Okay, I remember him from Sunday school. Didn't he die a few years before Jesus was born?
That's the one.
Yeah.
And we know Herod died in 4 BC. So since the Gospels say Jesus was born during his reign, boom, starting point.
Clever. So they use those historical milestones to narrow down the possibilities.
Precisely. And then they bring in the ages that are mentioned in the New Testament, like how Jesus was about 30 years old when he started preaching. By combining those details with the Jewish festival calendar, like when Passover would fall in, well, things start to get really specific.
Specific, like, give me the good stuff.
They're suggesting Jesus was crucified in 30 AD, Friday, April 7th, around 3 p.m. to be exact.
Whoa. Talk about nailing it down. Makes you look at history a little differently, you know? But how does this tie back to, doomsday predictions?
That's where their logic gets really interesting. They're basically saying, if you add 2,000 years to the year of the crucifixion, that 30 AD, you'll end right on 2030.
2030. So are they saying those 2024 folks were a few years off the mark?
It seems that way, yeah. Their thinking is, maybe those predictions were so focused on the stars that they missed some key details about Jesus's life, which threw them off a bit.
So 2030 is the new target, at least in their book. But I'm guessing that's not the whole story, right?
You got it. If 2030 is when they think the second coming might happen, then they figure the whole tribulation thing starts 7 years earlier in 2023.
So buckle up, because 2023 is just around the corner.
Right. And smack dab in the middle of all that, in 2026, is when they believe this abomination of desolation thing goes down.
Abomination of desolation.
Right.
Chills, man, chills. But before we get too far ahead, what about the rapture? Where does that fit into this new timeline?
Excellent question. They place it before the tribulation kicks off, so sometime before 2026. In fact, they even give a possible date, Rosh Hashanah in 2025.
Rosh Hashanah, for anyone listening who might not be familiar, that's...
The Jewish New Year.
Right, exactly. But what makes that date so important?
Well, it's not just a new year, it's the new year. A time for deep spiritual reflection, asking for forgiveness, turning a new leaf, one of the holiest days of the year.
So connecting the rapture to a day that already has this whole theme of judgment and new beginnings, pretty powerful imagery.
Yeah, they're definitely making a point by linking it like that.
Wow, okay, my head's already spinning and we haven't even gotten to the asteroid yet.
Ready to bring in some cosmic chaos.
Hit me with it. Let's see how this all connects. Okay, so we've got ancient prophecies, biblical timelines, and now we're throwing a massive asteroid into the mix. Talk about a recipe for doomsday. Give us the rundown on this asteroid, Apophis. How big are we talking? What kind of damage could it do if it actually hit us?
First off, let me assure you, the scientists who track these things say a direct impact is very unlikely. But for the sake of this deep dive, let's imagine. Apophis is about 4 football fields wide.
Whoa, okay, that's not exactly a little space pebble.
Not at all. Now, if something that size were to hit Earth, the impact energy is estimated to be around 1,200 megatons of TNT.
Okay, 1,200 megatons. Put that in regular people terms.
It's hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined.
Oh, whoa.
We're talking total devastation. Cities wiped out, tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. It would be catastrophic.
So this is the asteroid, this Apophis, that your source is connecting to Wormwood in Revelation. The whole star falling from the sky, poisoning the waters.
That's right. Now, they do acknowledge that a direct impact isn't very likely based on current projections. But even a near miss from something this big.
That's still got to be scary, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it.
Yeah.
The gravitational pull alone from an object that size, passing that close to Earth, it could be enough to throw our whole system out of whack. We're talking earthquakes, tsunamis, even volcanic eruptions. just from its gravitational pull.
So even without a direct hit, Apophis could still bring about some of the chaos described in Revelation. Man, this is where science and prophecy get really interesting.
No doubt about it. It makes you wonder, are these ancient prophecies meant to be taken literally? Or are they more like symbolic warnings, open to interpretation as our understanding of the universe grows?
Big questions. And it's not like we can just Google the answers.
And that's what makes these conversations so fascinating. We get to look at the same information from completely different angles.
And let's be honest, some of those angles are a little unnerving, especially when you're talking about asteroids that could mess up the whole planet.
True, but that's where critical thinking comes in, right? We don't have to accept any one interpretation blindly. We can weigh the evidence, look at it from different perspectives. That's what this is all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got Apophis potentially wreaking havoc, but I gotta ask, how does this all tie back to the 2030 prediction for the second coming?
You're right, it's all connected. Remember, this source built their entire timeline by tracing things back to their interpretation of Jesus' life. And for them, that hinges on a very literal understanding of biblical prophecy.
So are you saying there might be a bit of a disconnect between their interpretation of Apophis and what scientists are saying?
Well, it definitely highlights the challenges of reconciling evolving scientific knowledge with ancient texts that are often open to multiple interpretations.
You know, it's amazing how these deep dives always seem to unearth more questions than answers. We start with end times prophecies and end up contemplating like the whole nature of time, the role of faith in science.
It really makes you realize how much we still don't know, right?
It's humbling for sure, but the source material you shared's definitely given us a lot to chew on. They've woven together history, biblical interpretation, asteroid projections. It's a very intricate, very specific picture they've painted.
And that's what I appreciate about it. They're not just throwing out random predictions, they've put in the work. They're presenting a very carefully constructed interpretation, pulling from all these different sources.
Exactly. They've laid out all the puzzle pieces. Now it's up to us to decide how they fit together for ourselves.
And that's what it's all about. We should never be afraid to ask questions, to do our own research, and come to our own conclusions.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, from biblical timelines to asteroid impacts, but I think the biggest takeaway here is the importance of approaching these topics with a critical but open mind.
100%. Be open to different perspectives, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. You never know what you might learn.
Exactly. Curiosity, respectful dialogue, because even when we're talking about something as, well, intense as the end of the world, there's still so much room for wonder and exploration.
I love that. We have to remember it's all connected. History, science, faith, and we can use our critical thinking skills to try to understand these really complex ideas.
Well, on that note, I think we've officially reached peak existentialism for one episode. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. What a journey.
The pleasure was all mine. And to everyone listening, keep those fascinating deep dive requests coming. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and stay curious.